Jai Guru, everyone.
Jai Guru.
Jai Guru. Welcome to minute 50 of the podcast Awake Minute by Minute, where we were reviewing the life of Yogananda, the film. And in this minute, we have quite a sad minute, quite sorrowful. And they do a good job of portraying some of the sorrow that Guruji experienced during this tough time. So we have Swami Dhirananda, who says final breakup came a couple of years later when Dhirananda left the Swami order and then got married to one of his students, which kind of brings credence to all the previous newspaper stories about, misgoings on. And then to make matters worse, he sued Yogananda for his share of the work that they had done together. So there was a massive legal battle, and we will unwrap some of that legal battle in this minute, and that's what we'll focus on. And at the end of the minute, we actually hear the narrator Anupam Kher talking about Guruji essentially saying he's leaving for Mexico and cutting his ties and devoting himself to God rather than all the organizational and legal responsibilities, I'm sure. Mike, initial reflections?
Yeah, so we ended the last minute on this kind of already kind of sad note, and the music was a bit sad. And now I just want to give a shout out to Krishna Das, because this is like his song Mere Gurudev, right?
Yeah, such a good song.
Which is also a bit slow, but it sounds much more hopeful now. And it feels like now there's going to be a comeback that's going to start right here. And I really like that song. Just wanted to mention that.
Yeah, I had the same feeling whenever I heard this song first. I thought it was soulful. Yeah, it was perfect to use because for this minute, because of the sorrowful element to it as well. If you think of the arc of a storyline in a documentary or movie where everything's like great and rushing at the beginning and exciting, and we had that earlier on when Guruji was finding his guru and Sri Yukteswarji, and it was all very exciting. We've kind of hit the bottom of that, well, inverted arc in a sense. We've started out really high, and now we're kind of dipping in through. As Mike says, yes, we're going to be turning that corner as such, but this really culminates with the last couple of minutes where we're seeing how Yogananda struggled, and we're really kind of going through that journey with him in a way that we've talked about before, that we haven't really been exposed to an awful lot with SRF teaching. So whenever I first watched this was a really impactful moment for me in the documentary, where I could empathize a lot more with Guruji and everything that he went through in the song. Just it's like the cherry on top. So well picked by the directors.
Yes, Mere Gurudev. It's the way he sings it is such a devotional temperament. It really it's able to bring a tear to one's eye, isn't it? The way he sings it, and the context that they've used it in this film is quite powerful, which is slightly different because the way Krishna Das intends for it to be sung is for you to get into that devotional state, and that state of giving yourself, whereas this minute is really talking about the sorrow, actual the human sorrow of disappointment and things like that, as opposed to the devotional longing type of melancholy or sorrow, which is the tone of the music. Chris?
Yeah, I think that point there that you just said about it being human sorrow, it's really evident to me now that Yogananda did to some extent experience that, and he talks about what he wants to do next, and devote himself even more to God. So he had a really tough time with the media in the United States. He's been hit again with somebody close to him, and I think Yogananda has said before, you're not going to experience love that is pure as God's love is in human relationships. You must seek that in God's relationships. And even Yogananda is kind of getting let down, or he's having these moments with human relationships that must be a stark reminder for him to really go after God himself in those moments, as we see in this minute later on.
Yes, it's quite a fine line, isn't it? Drawing between avatar and a human birth, isn't it? Because when you're born into this human birth, you're you're influenced by the pull to such an extent that Swami Yogananda, when he was, Swami Sri Yukteswar, when he first met Yogananda or Mukunda back then, he said, if you ever see me fall from grace, promise to put my head on your lap and take us back to God, to the God we both worship and love. And obviously I haven't that's not a direct quote. Please go back to that chapter for the direct quote, but it's something to that effect. But if so it's not just exclusive to Yogananda. That's my point. It's any realized master, as soon as they're born here, they're under the influence in some way or the other. No doubt they can they can overcome that challenge or that influence easier than you and I. Perhaps they'll never fully fall to it such as you and I would, but they certainly experience it, and in that is where we have to really respect and admire the stuff that Guruji has gone through. For example, I think the court case that we're talking about here is probably the second or third large court case. As soon as he was procuring Mother Center, there was a big court case, and then there's more court cases that happen after this. But this one was obviously probably the worst one of his life, because essentially his best friend and his disciple, shall we say, is leaving, which is pretty painful, isn't it? So let's talk about this minute now. So firstly, we have Swami Dhirananda, which is, Swami Dhirananda says the final heartbreak came when a couple of years later Dhirananda left the Swami order altogether and married one of his LA students. Then he sued Yogananda. So firstly, let's talk about why he's suing Yogananda. So he's suing Yogananda because when he left the organization, the self-realization, Washington Yoga Center or whatever it was, Washington Education Center, it may have been called back then. When he left Guruji or wanted to leave, he said that he wanted his share of their work together, his share of financial proceedings. Essentially, you can imagine him having £0 and 0 cents, or sorry, $0 and 0 cents in his pocket. So he has requested some stipend for his services so that he can make a start, as it were. So what actually happened was that in 1928, he after we don't know why he left. We discussed the potential reasons for why he would leave in the previous minute, and you can check that out, and it's all conjecture because we don't know. No one knows, and unless SRF releases some letters or something like that, but that we don't know if they exist. So he left, and then he said, so he agreed with Guruji. Basu Kumar Bagchi is his name now. We won't call him Swami Dhirananda. He agreed with him, Mr Bagchi agreed with him that Yogananda would pay, or the SRF would pay him $8,000, $100 a month, and that takes to pay that off. It was going to take till 1936, and it took so Yogananda apparently, well, we know he paid one of those payments, and the rest, for whatever reason, did not get paid. And Mr Bagchi is now reclaiming that fund which he was owed. It was a promissory note, so Yogananda actually signed it. I owe you $8,000. So we'll discuss what happened next and why that would happen in a minute. But initial feedback, Mike?
So it kind of shows the difference of perspective between Yogananda and Dhirananda. So I feel like Dhirananda, when he joined Yogananda in America, maybe part of his motivation was serve his guru, who Yogananda was, because he also initiated him in Kriya Yoga, right? And part of it was maybe to kind of have some kind of career in America, which is contradictory to him being a monk of the Swami order and all those kind of things. But I feel like him suing Yogananda for this money in the end kind of means that he sees not primarily the mission of doing God's work, but he sees like building an organization that will make money. And now that he's out of the organization, he sues the organization to pay him, that this is important to him. It might also be true that he, like you said, he might not have had many other options to come to money at this point. But this is like a stark contrast. Like Yogananda, even if he would have left his own organization, he would never sue it because he saw this as God's work, right? He doesn't want to interfere with it.
Yeah, Swami Sri Yukteswar didn't, for example, say to young Mukunda, if I ever leave, promise me you won't sue me. It's just a crazy thought, isn't it? Yeah, Chris, sorry.
Yeah, my initial reflections on this is like, where's the logic? Like, what, I mean, how would you begin? Like, what premise is there, and why was the verdict to do $8,000? Like, what is the basis of this?
So the basis is obviously Mr. Bagchi calculated how much, the lessons and all that kind of stuff was, and how much time he'd spent over the past however many years, or five or so years, that he would have worked under Guruji's direction, and that's how he would have come up with that figure.
I mean more kind of like, where'd you get off? Like you're kind of agreeing. Yogananda says, look, I need help. I'm going to be away. I need somebody to come in to help me run things. A great honor, yeah. And you're coming into a not-for-profit, charity, or religious. It's a religious organization, right? So it's
educational. Yeah, Washington Education Center as well.
Education. Yeah. Okay, so maybe I just wonder what the financial structure of that was, and what the base is therefore of like getting money from it, because would Yogananda had been receiving a salary, or would anybody?
Well, when Dhirananda first accepted the role, we know that what they had agreed, and this comes up later in the court battle, was that Swami Dhirananda would be an ordained member of the Order of Swamis and a disciple of, a disciple, and he had no right to compensation, aid, just room, board and lodging, and incidental expenses, and the cost of clothing. That's what they argued later, that he should and would be entitled to, that Yogananda's team.
Yeah, well, that's what I was thinking then.
Yeah.
If you agreed to that, then what premise do you have to claim for any of the, I don't know where the logic for a kind of step.
Yeah.
But it's $30,000 in today's money.
In how much? Sorry.
130,000.
Seems, yeah. And also, interestingly, we see in this image, in this movie, a lot of pictures, two swamis of newspaper articles. Two swamis break up after 45 years of friendship, and then there's a nice other one. Swamis accuse each other in legal battle, because we know there was back and forth going on. And interestingly, in one of the in one of the newspapers, it actually says Swami Dhirananda, on whom he was conferred the rank Swami on January 15th, 1999 at Dihika, India, by Yogananda. So it's like an impartial newspaper who's just, glorifying this crazy battle that's going on, just inadvertently just states the everything that you need to know there, isn't it? That he ordained him as a Swami, and that means that part of the Swami order is you vow to become a renunciant, you vow to not hoard material wealth. Yeah, Chris.
It kind of speaks to how fickle the business is, in some ways, to say they'll kind of go after, it's kind of profiteering in a sense, whatever sells. And if this is like a dramatic story that sells, that they'll probably put aside their racism and things like this to really try to get the public to buy the papers.
Yeah, Mike.
I was just wondering what the reason for him was to leave the Swami order, because the Swami order is not Yogananda, right? He could have remained in the Swami order, just not be on Washington anymore. It might have helped him run his center.
Yeah, no, that would have, but he wanted to get married, didn't he?
That's correct.
He definitely has to. Definitely, having money is a gray area, but having children, marrying is definitely not a gray area in the Swami order, because even Swamis, in today's India and the world, they'll have a wallet for their expenses for food and things like that, and they have to get that money from somewhere. But the newspaper articles were quite confused. For example, American wife stands by Hindu in court. you imagine that kind of headline right now? It's just insane, isn't it? So yeah, that's what happened there. And during all this time, interestingly, Swami Yogananda tried to mend fences. Apparently, even before all this litigation, every year he would send Swami Dhirananda a box of mangoes every Christmas, and apparently they always were returned unopened. So this so just some context. So this was in between 1928 when we left the organization. The court case actually started in 1935. So just like before the end of the period for the installments, which was 1936, where he only received 100 of the $8,000 that was owed to him. This is Swami Dhirananda. Then he opened this litigation and sued Yogananda for the remaining $7,900 or $7,900. And yeah, we don't know why Guruji only made one payment. Perhaps in his mind, he didn't want to leave the Swami Dhirananda, Mr Bagchi, completely on the street without a penny to his name. So he gave him $100. But also this was at the time of the Great Depression. So we know that, this was before James Lynn entered the arena. So we know that Mother Centre suffered greatly from financial difficulties. So paying ex-Swamis is probably not something that any organization can really account for. But it's also interesting that what happened. Yeah, so there was lots of toing and froing, and Swami Yogananda at the time basically said, okay, I can't pay you that 8K, but also at the same time, there was some accounts issue during the time Swami Dhirananda was at the helm, and there was $16,000 or something dollars that was unaccounted for. So Guruji said, oh no, you must have that money, and in fact you're not entitled to the 8K either. So 24K, I want 24K. I'm counter suing you. So there was that, and then just as he did that, he was actually due. Swami Sri Yukteswar had called him to India. There's that famous message that he received: "Come if you'd come back home. I don't have long left in this mortal frame, something like that. Swami Sri Yukteswara said. So he decided to go back, but this was during all this legal proceedings, well, lots of toing and froing. And just before he left, Yogananda signed an order which says that everything he owns and possesses is the property of Self-Realization Fellowship and Yoga Satsang Society in India, which will receive half and half. And if I pass away whilst on my travels, then they should also receive half of my ashes in here, one half here and the other half in the empire, in whilst sojourning the empire in India. If I pass away, they should also, YSS in India should also get those ashes. So now this really puts the legal battle a bit into perspective, because now Guruji, he doesn't have a penny to his name, whereas Dhirananda is claiming the pennies and the cents and the dollars for himself. So that's quite a good masterstroke. And there's lots of news and blogs that people have written that say that it was very dirty, that the legal battle was very dirty, but we don't know that. We don't know what was and what didn't happen. Interestingly, Mr. Bagchi was actually being sued at the time for $10,000 because he married his wife, who was married to a very famous filmmaker in India, and so he said, "Oh, you lured away my wife," and so he was going through his own $10,000 litigation. And so all of this came to a head, and in the end, I think the court went in favor of Mr. Bagchi and ordered Yogananda to pay $8,000, and which is obviously the letter of the court. Dhirananda had this piece of paper that was signed, so by the letter of the court, even though swamis aren't supposed to have any wealth and they're supposed to volunteer their time, etc., the court went with Mr. Bagchi. But rather than, Yogananda would have done some counterclaims and repealed and all that kind of stuff, rather than going through that whole process, they decided to settle together out of court for $4,000. And apparently all of that money went to the lawyers. And at that time, James Lynn was around and settled the bill essentially. So all of that hassle that Mr. Bagchi went through decided and did not end up, fulfilling any of his aims, really. Chris?
Yeah, it's so sad, isn't it, in some ways? A man of, I assume, some great intelligence to go after, the organization that he helped build. And shocking to me that they actually had in the courts a favor towards Dhirananda. Sorry, I forget this.
Mr. Bagchi.
Mr. Bagchi. And I wonder speculatively if that was a sign of the times, if there was something there that they were maybe leaning towards him because of the nature of the ignorance, let's say, of what they were doing and how they were doing it and what the purposes were. We see in many of the papers, they talk about the rituals and things there that they're obscene, and they don't really recognize them as they might another faith.
But they had the court has to go with a contract or letter of the contract is legally binding, isn't it? So if Yogananda had signed, "I owe you $8,000," then the court can't interpret that Swami means a renunciant and you're not supposed to have material wealth and volunteer your time. This is in India that might work, but this is USA, which they don't. Swami is just like Mr. or Doctor to them, isn't it? Doesn't mean any spiritual significance. Interestingly, talking about India, whilst he was in India, there was a famous reporter called Dr. Bose, and he started like bad mouthing gurus in America and Yogananda was one of them, saying like, they're just after people, after people's money and just, convincing them that they need all this help and all that kind of crazy stuff. And he was actually studied at the same school, same university as Mr Bagchi when he left. So he was basically his friend. So Mr Bagchi was even reporting. So Guruji was in India whilst he was battling this court, all this court stuff, and he was he was fighting on all fronts, Mr Bagchi, because he was also using his influence in India to spread some malicious tales over there as well, which apparently Guruji was not happy about, understandably so. Mike?
I found one thing I found funny that he said, like, this filmmaker sued Bagchi for marrying his wife,
Yeah.
which shows kind of the role of women at this time. Like, that's a bit crazy, and then they even had to settle for a meaningful amount there. And then also it's definitely like this now, probably was like that back then, that suing, like the threshold for suing somebody in America is the lowest I've seen in any other country. Like, I feel like here, like if someone sues me where I grew up in Austria, I would be super offended, and this would be like a really big thing, which it was here probably, right? But I feel like in America, people suing each other is more commonplace than in other places.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, they're very, very, very independent. Yeah, so it's the history of the nation is very different to most. So it's like a derivative of like each person is a king in and of themselves, and they can kind of do as they wish.
Yeah. Another interesting point to note is that Swami Srikdeshwar apparently warned Guruji that Mr Bagchi is no good and that there would be trouble. And also Guruji had an inkling as well, according to letters and other things like that, premonitions. But so we still don't know if Guruji had all these warnings, and with his all-seeing eye, no doubt he would have perceived some events to transpire. But why would he then willingly go through this? There's some theories out there, shall we say, on various channels and in the public. Apparently, Yogananda felt that it was his duty, and they had some karma from previous incarnations, and that he wanted to set Dhirananda on the right path, essentially. Apparently, we can't confirm or deny this, but Yogananda was William the Conqueror in centuries gone by, 11th century, William the Conqueror. And according to Swami Dhirananda, the oldest of William's three sons, and rebelled against his father in the 11th century, was Dhirananda, i.e. Mr Bagchi. And so they've got history, a karmic history going back 9 centuries. So Guruji had an eye for that history, I suppose, and a sense of responsibility to bring up his long lost son, perhaps. Would you say such a word? Go on, Mike.
I love those kind of theories that float around in the forums. I grew up in an SRF family, so we would talk about those kind of things a lot as well. And I'm not sure, like, if I should like say, okay, it was probably like that or it was not like that. But it does kind of show that Yogananda saw, like, it talks about the guru-disciple relationship, right? You accept a guru and a guru accepts you. And even if you forsake him, he's not forsaking you, right? And so he's cares about his welfare, even though his ego is taking control. And I don't, like we said, we don't really know what caused the fallout, but apparently he got hurt, right? And he somehow felt that he now needs to go on an ego trip and sue his own guru and leave the Swami order and get married, and everything flipped in his life. And even though he did all those things, his guru held on to him. And I don't know if he reincarnated by now, or he might be a devotee in this incarnation. We don't know.
Yep. He's got some debts to pay, I suppose, in more ways than one.
We all do, right?
Yeah. Unless anyone's got any further things to add about that, let's leave the legal battle to one side. I'm glad the film will no longer mention this part of Guruji's struggle, but it does next part of the minute does focus on Guruji's melancholy and his sorrow at the events that transpired. And I don't think it's really about the money. It's more that I quote, his long lost son, Swami Dhirananda, has left him, and he's, in his eyes, he's probably due to be in the mire of delusion, perhaps for another lifetime. So he's another, one devotee that he's not going to be able to take back to God in this life. The airplane route, he has just vacated the plane. Probably with. Do you think he had a parachute? Do you think he had a parachute or not really? He got that $4,000 parachute. But yeah, anyway, so it says that he went to with a heavy heart. He he took a trip to Mexico, and the story behind that is the family of Oscar Sanger, who's a famed baritone singer and voice teacher, he'd become Yogananda's student and friend. He'd passed away, and his family invited Guruji, to Mexico. And then he went there, and this is where he would have seen some of the sights in Mexico, and he writes about some of that in the Autobiography of Yogi, and also he wrote the song, apparently the cosmic chant, I will be thine always, there, which starts, devotees may come, devotees may go, but I will be thine always. My Lord, I will be thine always. So yeah, that's it kind of does feel like it would be related, doesn't it? Because he's had a devotee that he's known for the majority of his life go away, I suppose. Yeah, Mike?
Yeah, I wonder if when I sing this song in the future, I will always think about Dhirananda now. But I kind of when I read this, it was so, again, like every time Guruji shows human emotions, it is kind of like it shows that all the struggles that he had to deal with, right? And again, this is not in the Autobiography of a Yogi. That how hurt he was, and then he did this trip to Mexico to recover basically from this loss, right? And get over there, like get some energy again. And I'm just like, those kind of stories, they kind of are very, it's sad, but it's also heartwarming.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, he was in India and getting all this bad press by this Dr. Bose. He didn't mention that in the Autobiography of Yogi. He didn't mention any of the 3 big legal battles in the Autobiography, all the travesty in the sense of all the, people backstabbing, and he mentioned none of that really, did he? All the and even like Mr. Bagchi, apparently he, in the court cases, he even like said, not said, but he was accusing Yogananda of the stuff that he was accused of in the papers, like the sexual promiscuities. And so it got extremely dirty. So it wasn't just backstabbing, it was like severe, in terms of defamation and all that kind of stuff. So it was terrible. But we've got some nice pictures of this supposed, the pictures kind of show that he's going to Mexico. And interestingly, the picture with Guruji on a sailboat, like 50 meters away.
You mean that one?
That's the one. Yes, this one. If you watch this minute, it's actually a video. So it's not a picture. it's actually a video of that sailboat going away.
Yeah.
That's pretty cool, isn't it? I always thought it was a picture, but it's a video. Interesting. And then there's a nice picture of Guruji looking away from the screen, and a picture of Guruji with his Esraj instrument, probably intimating that he's playing that chant, "I will be thine always, my Lord." That one. Yeah, it's a couple of images of that Esraj. And that's pretty much the minute. Mike?
So I wanted to mention the pictures of him. Also, a lot of them are in Mexico, right? And he was at the Mexican pyramids. I don't know which one. Probably Teotihuacan, which is near Mexico City, but it might be another one. I know they have multiple sites. And I want to read this short part from the Autobiography of a Yogi, where he talks about how beautiful Mexico is. Totally gonna butcher the name of this place because it started with X, but he says, as entries in a scenic beauty contest, I offer for first prize either the gorgeous view of Xochimilco in Mexico, where mountains, skies, and poplars reflect themselves in myriad lanes of water amidst the playful fish, or the jewel-like lakes of Kashmir. And if anyone wants to go on a holiday and doesn't know where to go, I feel like this Xochimilco place, I definitely want to see this one day. Looks very, I googled some of the pictures, looks very beautiful.
Yeah.
And there's one more thing I just want to tee up for a future minute, but it was mentioned that, I'm not going to read this now, but later on, Guruji, when he talks to Rajasi, he mentions Dhirananda at least once, where he says the hole that was in his heart created when Dhirananda left was more than filled by him, right? So this was kind of the final closure of that story when Rajasi comes and joins Guruji.
Yeah. I really find it heartwarming that Guruji still wishes him well. For example, sending the mangoes and every Christmas, and you know, having sympathy for him in terms of he gave him that $100 willingly. You know, he didn't need to sign that $8,000 promissory note in any way, did he? But he did, and then he gave him that $100 as well. So he still had, some empathy for him, even though all of this was going to happen. That's pretty much that minute. And unless anyone has any more, we shall end it there and put an end to this chapter of this film where there's controversy for the sake of capturing and retaining the interest of the audience, which I think we've discussed in the past, my views on it, but I was outvoted by Chris and Mike's and Anya, who said, no, it's good. We need to see his human side, and I agree now. On that note, we shall see you next time, everyone. Jai Guru, Jai Guru, Jai Ma.